Current five-star and younger brother of former Kentucky standout has made it very clear where the Wildcats stand with him in his recruitment. They really, really, really want him.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. You can make every moment more, and right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, going to be talking about Karter Knox's current recruitment. He provided an update to Tipton of On3 about where he stands with a variety of the schools inside his top 8. Talked about the Wildcats and how desperately they want him. And I think after taking a look at his tape, they really, really should. Also on today's episode, we have tip-off times for the majority of Kentucky basketball's 2023-24 schedule. Going to take a look at it, provide you an update there. Really excited as we get closer and closer to the start of basketball season. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcast, please sub or follow along wherever you are tuned in. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky in pursuit of Karter Knox. Actually, let's take a step back here for a second. How could I have possibly forgotten? For those of you out there that remember the start of the college football season just a few short weeks ago, I said that I would point something out every weekend or after every weekend of college football, the Iowa point tracker. In case you don't know, Brian Ferentz needs to reach a certain amount of points per game at the end of the season to keep his job as the offensive coordinator of the Hawkeyes. I think Kentucky's got a really good shot to meet them in a bowl game again this postseason. Would be really, really funny if they were the ones that kept him away from earning this 25-point per game margin that he needs to maintain. Let's get an update on the Iowa point tracker. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, there's little Brian Ferentz in the corner, 85 points for the Iowa Hawkeyes so far this year, after scoring a 0 in a 31-0 shutout at the hands of the Penn State Nittany Lions. They are currently averaging a little over 21 points per game. That's not going to do it after scoring, I believe, 41 the week prior. Little Brian Ferentz may be on the way out as Iowa's offensive coordinator. We're going to keep an eye on that. I just wanted to give you an update on the Iowa point tracker because I forgot for a week. So, Kentucky in pursuit of Karter Knox. I think the first thing we need to point out here when watching this kid's film is that he is broader than his brother. He has a wider frame than his brother Kevin Knox. If you remember Kevin Knox, about 6'8", 6'9", really, really good at shooting the basketball, especially from beyond the arc. Nice form, pure form, but a little bit wiry, I think, especially in comparison to his brother. If you want his dimensions, he is 6'5", 205 pounds, according to 24/7 Sports. Probably has put on a little bit more weight, I think, since the time that they measured him. Plays for OT Elite in Atlanta, Georgia. He's originally from Tampa, Florida. If you go and watch some of his highlights, I believe it was Tampa Catholic that he was playing for. I think that that's the first thing that we need to identify is that he is not, in terms of frame and in terms of, I think, physicality, like his brother. I think he is a little bit different, obviously, a little bit shorter. But in terms of talent, I think he is right there with Kevin as far as his abilities. He is a top 15 player overall, according to the 24/7 Sports player rating system. According to their composite rankings, he's the number 11 player overall in the country, number 3 small forward, and the number 2 player in the state of Georgia. Some places have him listed at 6'6", others have him listed at 6'5". He's your, I think, prototypical small forward build. You like the size there. You like the broader frame. That's something that I believe that actually that On3 points out in their scouting report, that his frame is very projectable and already physically developed. So I think that you like what you see from a physical standpoint out of Karter Knox. You like that. You like the talent. And then what do you see out of his offensive game here? I think that's what we also need to highlight. The fact that Karter Knox is one of the better shooters that I've seen coming out of high school, going to watch their highlights and going to watch their jump shot. I like his jump shot. I think it's consistent. I like the form. I like the fact that he can utilize not just the outside shot, but also can get into the mid-range. I think you see that a lot in his film, where he's able to do a lot of different things on the offensive end of the floor when it comes to creating his shot and then finding space. I also think that he works really well in catch-and-shoot situations. You get to see some of that during his highlight tape. I think I've impressed overall with his offensive game. It's the shooting. That's what you like about Karter Knox, the shooting. The guy can knock it down from a variety of areas. The second thing that you like about Karter Knox on not only the offensive end, but also the defensive end of the floor is at 6'5", again, with maybe a bit of a bulkier frame, more physical frame. The kid has bounce. I mean, the kid can go up and get it, whether it be catching lobs, whether it be throwing down very aggressive dunks in transition. Whenever it comes to blocking shots, you get to see a lot of aggression from him when it comes to flying high and getting things done there on both ends of the floor again. So you really like the athleticism, explosive athlete, phenomenal shooter. He looks like an NBA guard. You give this kid a little bit more time to polish his game. You give him some development at a place like Kentucky, a one-and-done spot, I think is where you're going to see Karter here. He's a lottery pick. This is a potential lottery pick on your hands as long as everything goes well, no injuries, knock on wood. A little bit more physical, I think, than his brother, just as good of a shooter, and then overall bouncier. I think that you like the explosion and the excitement that you see from his highlight tape. It really jumps out at you, no pun intended. So Karter Knox, one of the better players in the entire country for the 2024 class. I don't know if I mentioned that. This is the 2024 class for Karter Knox here. Brother of a former Kentucky Wildcat. What did he have to say when asked about his recruitment with Kentucky? Well, I think the big thing here is the quote where he mentioned that Kentucky really, really wants him. They think they can make me a one and done and go to the pros, he said in his interview with Joe Tipton. He also said that they think they can really develop my game, and they think I fit their style of play. Cal really loves me, and the coaching staff really loves me. Obviously, they do. After recruiting his brother to come play for UK for that, I believe it was in 2018. Was when Kevin Knox was here. Of course, this staff loves him. Of course, Big Blue Nation loves him. I mean, there's no reason why you wouldn't be fired up about a player like Karter Knox, even if he wasn't a high-profile five-star. I think there would be a lot of fans out there saying, I would love to have him on the team. But the fact that he is such a good player in high school, on scholarship with OTE, and also has this tie to Lexington, I think it makes a lot of sense to see Kentucky kind of at some point in this recruitment pull out in front. I think that would make sense. Right now, it's looking like Louisville and Kentucky, who have been the two teams to get him on a visit, are the ones that are kind of at the top, but he's got a very solid top 8, and he's also got scheduled visits to South Florida and Arkansas, so you cannot sit here and say, well, Kentucky's just going to get him because he has a brother that played here, and then that's just how it's going to be. There could very well be a lot of different directions that this takes, and also G League Ignite is also one of his top 8 places that he could end up going. So nothing's guaranteed, but you like the fact that he knows how much this staff and he knows how much this fan base cares about him. He actually went on in his comments here about Kentucky to talk about the atmosphere in Lexington. He said, quote, "When I went there to Lexington, it was really like a basketball city. Kentucky, that's really all they've got. The fans are crazy for Kentucky, and the stadium will be packed every game." Rupp Arena, I think that we would all love to see this kid come, and I think the Rupp Arena would be definitely packed out for Karter Knox for maybe what could be his first few games here in blue and white at some point next season. I'd love to see it. Karter Knox, again, one of the best players in the 2024 recruiting class, a player that I would love to see Kentucky pick up, a player that the Wildcats clearly want to get. They love him. They really want to bring him onto the team next year. One and done prospect, lottery pick type of player, excellent shooter, great bounce. Those are the things that I see in Karter Knox. If you have any thoughts on Karter Knox and whether or not Kentucky should pursue him, whether or not Kentucky could utilize him in I think a very prominent role next season. Whatever you think about Knox and his recruitment, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below. All right, I want to get to here a discussion about Kentucky basketball's schedule. They have released times for the majority of their games this upcoming season. Very excited about this. In fact, I believe all but just a couple, if not one, SEC game has been announced. At least the tip-off times have. So I want to dive into that because I think it's really interesting. Most of the times here, I want to get into that in just a second. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can snap into action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So if you lose, you can put the money on essentially whatever you'd want. If you win, congratulations. You got $200 in bonus bets. You can still lay down on just about whatever you want. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options from spreads, player props, over-unders, all of that good stuff, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That is FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. If you've not checked out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Andy Patton and Isaac Shade, you would be sadly mistaken if you have not done so. They do really, really good work over there at the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Patton and Shade have on myself to talk about Kentucky. They have on coaches. They have analysts. They have all sorts of guests to help break down what's going on in the college basketball world. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Again, as a Kentucky fan, I've talked about them before a lot on the show. We've had them on the show before. If you want to stay up to date with not just what's going on with Big Blue Nation, which they do talk about, and you want to learn about what's going on in the college basketball world, I would strongly encourage you to go over there because they provide updates on everything. So Locked On College Basketball Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, or on YouTube. Go give them a sub. They deserve it. All right. Game times have been announced for the 2023-24 schedule, and I think these game times are really interesting. The two games here, I want to point out this at the top. There are two games that are going to end up being like early afternoon. Every other game is either later in the day or at night. You have Florida on January 6th on the road. This is going to be an ESPN game at 12:30. And then late in the year, March 2nd, 1:30 p.m. on CBS. This is typically where you find Arkansas on the schedule, and this is where you find them on CBS at 1:30. Again, all these times are Eastern. Just to make a note here. And then Penn in the non-con slate is going to be at noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central. Outside of those games, you've got a lot of 7, 8, 9 p.m. For one game in particular. Most of these games are going to be on either SEC Network or ESPN or ESPN2. Kentucky in the spotlight for the majority of their contests this season. Gonzaga also going to be on CBS at 4 p.m. I cannot wait for that game. I'm probably going to come up. By the way, here's a question for you guys. I want to come up for as many Kentucky games as possible this upcoming season. What are some games that you think that I should come to in Rupp Arena this spring? Let me know in the YouTube comments below if there are any games that you think that I should pull up to, and then why. If you think the atmosphere is going to be great, if you think it's just going to be a really nice introductory to Rupp Arena. I've never been, so let me know in the YouTube comments below. What game should I go to? I want to start here at the top, though, and kind of work our way through it. They do not have times announced for the exhibition games against Georgetown College or Kentucky State, but New Mexico State, the season opener for Kentucky, is going to start at 8 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network. A little bit of a late tip for the Wildcats, but you know what? Most of these teams are going to be tipping late anyway. I'm so excited for that game. Probably going to do a live stream on November 6th after that game to kind of give you guys a recap as to what we saw. Texas A&M Commerce and the game against Kansas have not been announced either. Stonehill is to be determined still. And then you've got a run here. We have game times announced. St. Joseph's on November 20th, 7 p.m. SEC Network. Marshall, November 24th, 7 p.m. SEC Network. Miami, the SEC ACC Challenge. That's going to be a big one. That's at 7:30 p.m. November 28th on ESPN. Going to be a great game to go and watch. December 2nd, UNC Wilmington is at 7 p.m. on SEC Network. Penn, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be at noon on ESPN2. North Carolina, December 16th. I'm going to be at this game, 5:30 p.m. on CBS in Atlanta. That's going to be a fun matchup. And then you get closer and closer to the SEC slate, but you have Louisville, which is to be determined, and then Illinois State, the Antonio Reeves Bowl at 7 p.m. on SEC Network, December 29th. And then here we go. SEC slate, walk through it with me here. You start off on the road at Florida, 12:30 p.m. ESPN. This is going to be a really interesting game. Probably going to know a good bit about the Gators at this point, considering they've brought in a couple of interesting pieces that may shape their roster differently this year. Looking for a more efficient offense from Todd Golden and co., and I think you may get it this year. I really, really do. That's going to be a tough out to start the SEC slate on the road. It's going to be a fun one. Then you come back home on January 9th, Missouri. That's going to be at 7 p.m. on ESPN. Then you go on the road January 13th at Texas A&M, 3 p.m. on ESPN. The past couple of years, this game has been later in the evening. Thankful that this one's in the afternoon because it does tend to get crazy at night there down in College Station. Then you've got two games at home, January 17th and January 20th. Mississippi State at 7 p.m. on ESPN2, and then Georgia at 6 p.m. on SEC Network. That January 20th game against Georgia, it always seems to be kind of fun whenever you play Georgia towards the beginning of the SEC slate as you kind of wade into conference play. That one should be interesting. I'm going to have my eye on that one as well. Two road games here after the two-game home stretch. January 23rd at South Carolina. This one's going to be at 7 p.m. SEC Network. Then at Arkansas, January 27th, prime time, 6 p.m. on ESPN. Woo, this one's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to that one. And then you've got two games at home. Florida, to be determined on ESPN or ESPN2. That one is on January 31st, and then February 3rd against Tennessee at home. This one's going to start at 8:30 on ESPN. You got to be a late tip here for the Wildcats. You go on the road to Vanderbilt February 6th. This one's also going to be at 8:30 p.m. on the SEC Network instead. And then Gonzaga, like I mentioned, 4 p.m. CBS, February 10th. Be there or be square. That one's going to be hype. Ole Miss at home, February 13th, 9 p.m. on ESPN. I think that's the latest tip here outside of LSU, which we'll get to in a second. Then you go on the road to Auburn, February 17th, 6 p.m. on ESPN. That one's going to be a really big game. Auburn always gets up for that one. LSU on the road, 9 p.m. ESPN, February 21st. February 24th, you are at home against Alabama at 4 p.m. on CBS. Then you go to Mississippi State, 7 ESPN. March 2nd against Arkansas, 1:30 p.m. CBS. Vanderbilt at home, 9 p.m. against on the SEC Network. That actually just says SEC on the graphic. They need to make a change there. And then you finish the year on the road in Knoxville at Tennessee, 4 p.m. CBS. You notice here, as you get halfway through the slate, you get to that Gonzaga game, and you get to CBS, and then you get Bama, Arkansas, Tennessee, as we get closer and closer to March Madness. I love the atmosphere of CBS basketball games, CBS sports basketball games. They are just so perfect. You love the music. You love the excitement. You love the announcers. I'm very excited. Very, 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 very excited for this upcoming schedule. You can find this on social media if you want to go to Kentucky Basketball's either Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find this all over the place. If you're on Threads, you can go check them out there as well. Kentucky Basketball still follows me on Threads, which I just don't understand, but you know what? I'll take a follow from the Wildcats, and I'm just so thrilled that we are almost here for the entire schedule, not just the conference schedule, the entire schedule. So if you've got any thoughts on the schedule for Kentucky basketball, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below. Also, before we wrap up here, I've got one final thing to say to you guys. October's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. I've got some great topics that we can dive into. But I also want to ask you guys, if you have questions for the show heading into this year about the lineup, about the rotation, about about what we're going to see at point guard from the Wildcats, about statistically what we may see. If you want to talk more in depth about some of these games as we get closer to them, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the YouTube comments below. If you're watching there, if you're listening on podcast, at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you're probably going to reach me the easiest. If you want to check me out on Instagram, at Kentucky Podcast, you can also do that as well. Lance__ on Twitter if you want to go give me a follow there. But at Locked On UK is probably the easiest place to find me on social media and ask me a question, and I'll do my best to answer it on the show. And I really, really enjoy your feedback. I love to always see you guys in the comments. I get to see some people pretty consistently in here, show after show. I do not take this for granted. I'm very excited to get to do what is going to be, man, is it my third season already with you guys for the Locked On Kentucky podcast? Just insane to think about that we're all already there. So once again, thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. I know some of you have been here since I started back in December or November rather of 2021. So please keep listening. If you're new to the show and you've made it all the way through, thank you so much for listening, by the way. Subscribe to the show. It's going to be a fun season. I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter, like I mentioned, at Locked On UK. Follow us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Lance_, and one more time on Instagram at Kentucky Podcast. Guys, if you have any questions, comments, opinions, you can leave them in the YouTube comments below. You can also hit me on the socials, and I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.